bunch of colleagues from the University of British Columbia, where I used to be. But yeah, now I'm in Colorado, and we're here today to engage you in a session to think about environmental human rights, and to marry science and law, and to try and understand what scientists can do better to aid environmental lawyers in realising human rights, specifically for the most underserved populations. And so we're really excited to have you here today. We've got some excellent experts to kick us off, to engage you in the ideas, to inspire you, and then we're going to get into an interactive session. So would you like to introduce some of our experts now?
Definitely. So we're going to start with Joyita Gupta, Professor Joyita Gupta. She's joining via Zoom from Amsterdam, so a huge time difference for her. Exactly. Thank you so much, Professor Gupta, for joining us today. It's a true honor to have you here as a speaker. Professor Gupta is a full professor of environment and development in the Global South at the Amsterdam Institute for Social Science Research at the University of Amsterdam. She's also the faculty professor on sustainability and leads the program group on governance and inclusive development. She was co-chair of UNEP's Global Environment Outlook. I invite you all to look this up. And she has also been named as co-chair of the Earth Commission, set up by Future Earth and supported by the Global Challenges Foundation. I would encourage you all to check her work out. We love it. So we will start with a presentation by Professor Gupta so that she can afterwards say goodbye to us. And we will welcome additional two experts on the matter. One of them will be David Boyd, Professor David Boyd, Associate Professor, IRS School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC. He's the former UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to a Healthy Environment, and author of more than 10 UN reports, author of 7 books, over 100 articles, an amazing kayaker, and beloved human being. He couldn't join us today because he's got a class, but he sent us a video. So that's the second expert, and the third expert will be Doctora Laura Castrejón Violante, UBC. Muchas gracias, Laura. A lawyer and academic, more lawyer than academic, she told me. She's been studying and analyzing our right to food and has focused on the incorporation and implementation of it in Latin American countries. She worked at the Federal Public Service in Mexico and co-authored the Constitutional Human Rights Amendment presented by Mexican President Vicente Fox to the Mexican Congress on 2005. She holds 2 master's degrees, the first one in international law and development, and the second one in urban food systems planning. She also told me that she's a brilliant mom, and I believe her.
I attest to that. She's a brilliant mom.
So these are our amazing speakers for today. Let's begin with a presentation led by Joyita Gupta. Thank you, Professor Gupta.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about human rights, but from a very different perspective. I am trained as a lawyer, but I wanted to link human rights to environmental issues. So basically, I'm going to talk about a safe planet on a just world and the role of human rights in global constitutionalism. So what I look at is, if we look at the environmental system and we are looking at boundaries, people talk about planetary boundaries. The question is that safe boundary just? And to identify whether the safe boundaries are just, we actually use 3 different criteria, which is intergenerational equity, intra-generational equity, and interspecies equity. But essentially, one of the fundamental questions we are asking is, are human rights violated? Then we look at the inner circle and we say, can we meet minimum needs of all people under the SDGs and under the human rights within these boundaries? And the third question is the allocation of the remaining resources just? Is the allocation of risks and harm just? Is the allocation of responsibilities just? And so basically there we are talking about how do means interact with human rights. This particular figure is something that came out in our Nature paper last year, where we are arguing that 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is included in the Paris Agreement, the Paris Agreement talks about 2 degrees, and if possible, as low as 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels as the long-term target. And we argue that 1.5 is not good enough, because already at 1 degree centigrade, 70 million people are exposed to death from extreme temperatures and extreme humidity. And the question this raises is, how many people can die from a particular problem before we draw the line? So where do we draw the line of no significant harm to humans? And in the climate change issue, we did not discuss this, while in the water negotiations and water treaties, the no harm principle is quite strong. So in our Nature paper, we proposed 1 degree, and we also did a political science expose of how the 1 degree target was dumped because people thought it would conflict with their growth aspirations. So that's a little story we have about how we look at numbers in relation to human rights. And for me, the fact that we're talking about more than 70 million being exposed to death or irreversible changes in their lives is really quite high. I think the number is very high in terms of not causing harm to people. So when I live, do I have a human right not to be damaged or not to have a house damaged by somebody else's careless behavior somewhere else in the world? That's the story. Okay, then what we did was we looked at the safe and just boundaries with respect to a number of areas: phosphorus, nitrogen, groundwater, surface water, biosphere, etc. The green circle tells you the safe and just boundary. The red circle is the safe boundary. The blue one is the just boundary. And essentially, the yellow balls tell you where we are in relation to the boundaries. So what you see over here is that all the boundaries have been breached except the aerosol boundary. But that has been breached at local level in cities worldwide, because 7 billion people die annually from indoor and outdoor air pollution, which is a violation of the standards of air pollution. And these standards of air pollution are there to protect humans and to ensure that they have a right to clean air. So in some ways, what we're trying to do is to link the human rights narrative and the SDG narrative, and to give them numbers and quantify them based on a very big interdisciplinary working group. And then we looked at where are these boundaries breached. The darker the color, the more these boundaries have been breached, which means the more people in those areas where others has been violated. So it's basically the do no harm principle linked to human rights. The second story we worked on is minimum access. So you have human rights to food, water, energy, infrastructure that emerge from other more primary human rights and that are also supported by the SDGs. So we took the minimum human rights. We said, hey, how do we quantify this in terms of food level, dignities a lower level, escape from poverty a little higher level, and then we calculated it through a number of formulae to see what is the pressure on the environment. Now, and in this exercise, we used the same units of damage on the domain as we use for the boundary. And so we can say how much is left over after we give all human beings access to their basic human rights, calculated in terms of impacts on CO2, impacts on water, impacts on nutrients, etc. And then if you have all the basic needs for everyone on earth, so there's no one above the basic needs level, and then you have the max, then you can see what is the space you can share. Because as I told you earlier, we are outside the boundaries and we have not yet met minimum needs. So we have to try and meet minimum needs first and then reallocate the boundary in a theoretical thought exercise. Okay. In the Lancet Planetary Health Earth Commission report, which I led, these are our final results. So what you see is the corridor. Once you have a minimum need, which is then marked with the dotted lines, and then you have the outer boundary, and then you can calculate how much space there is. And if you look at 2050, and you just give everybody on Earth just a minimum access, 3 bulbs in a refrigerator. If you just do that, but I'm also talking about the energy for making food, the energy for water, so I'm talking about all the energies, not just the energy for lighting. If you look at that, what you will see is that there is no corridor. So just providing minimum needs means we're outside a safe and just climate boundary, and that basically means that the entire structure of our legal system, our economic system, and our governance system is wrong. It needs to be drastically transformed. Anyway, that's the story of 3 papers, one in Nature, one in Lancet, and there was also a narrative about Earth system justice, which underlines this, which builds on the human rights narrative and takes it further through an interdisciplinary approach. And so what I'm now currently working on, because I got a grant to do anything I like, it's a prize, and so I'm working now on a theoretical project called the Global Constitution. And what we're trying to do is not necessarily look for, is it acceptable? What we're trying to do is, what do we need from a scholarly perspective? And we are inviting essays from anybody and everybody on Earth to write a small 1,000-word essay. If you write your essay, it goes into our book of essays on a global constitution and what you want in it, and the ideas in your essay then feed into the global constitution. So I'd be very grateful if you all join in this process, because it's an open science justice lab. And then once your ideas are used, you also become a contributing author to this draft code of global constitutionalism. It's an activist project, if you like. So basically what I want to conclude is that environmental degradation is violating human. We have not yet met basic human rights, and that's why we need to meet minimum human rights. However, meeting minimum human rights, given the current system, will mean the rest of the world continues to use their high emissions. And don't forget that the meeting the minimum rights of the people below the minimum is less than the impacts of the top 4%. So the top 4% has such a great pressure as the bottom 40% or so. So our narrative is, let's see how do we more equitably distribute this global quantified eco-space between people, first meet their minimum rights, stay within the boundaries and reallocate. That's the theoretical thought experiment, and this requires so much changes in the governance system that in some way I feel that we all need to be working towards a global, and as a UN project, because within the UN system it gets sort of diluted in the negotiation process. I am co-chair of the 10-member group that advises the Secretary General of the United Nations, spark certain ideas there, but I think it would be better for us to try and do as global scientists or as youth, housewives, pensioners, if we would then put in ideas and try to do something separately, collectively. So that was my basic story. It's not the traditional human rights story, and I'm open to your questions.
That was absolutely brilliant, Zulueta, for setting the stage for us, for giving such a nuanced view on planetary boundaries and how human rights sit within that. I have 1,000 questions to ask you, but I'm going to hand it over to the audience. We're going to take 1 or 2 questions before we let you go today. So we've got one at the back. I'm just going to run and get that for you. And introduce your name and your question.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Maria. I'm from Colombia. And I was just wondering, maybe it's not a question just for you, but more of a reflection and maybe a question for all of us, no? You've said that all boundaries have been crossed. Then I was wondering, how are we going to speak about justice in a system that it's not willing to decrease, and that it's not going to have a reverse in some of these boundaries, no? Like, it's not possible to go back to a safe boundary or to a safe place, no? Or either way, maybe the going back to a safe place
it is possible to go back to a safe. In most cases, to try to go back to the safe space, to the safe and just space. For biodiversity, of course, if a species becomes extinct, that's difficult to do. But at least we can try to maximum space for a species to flourish. And in climate change, it is also possible in the century to come back to one, if possible, or 1.5, if we cross it now. But the problem is that on climate change, we should really not play with the system as with biodiversity. But water we can clean up to some extent, not all the plastics, not all the permanent PFASs. So it really requires all of us who will be affected to, everybody wants a business model to do things, and they want profit all the time. Where they want to where they want small states, because all these big businesses are wanting small states. They don't want to pay their taxes, and if you don't pay your taxes, there's no money in the state, a responsible state, an accountable state. There's no money in that kind of a state to protect the public goods and to make sure that everybody gets access to merit goods. So for me, it's really important that we join hands together, because if we don't work together, so you and I might disagree slightly on what is justice, but that should not stop us in our collaboration in trying to fight for a system where we put, where we make the big CEOs of oil companies liable for what they have been doing, because that's so important to do, where we make people who are at the top of the corporate sector accountable for mistakes that they are making, and where we also hold our prime ministers and presidents accountable for making short-term decisions. I mean, tonight is a very exciting night because we don't know what's going to happen in the United States and how it will influence the world, but all our human rights are at stake. Everybody. I mean, nobody in the Netherlands is going to escape. You know, it's not like only global South countries will suffer. Everybody will suffer. So it's for all of us, ordinary citizens, for all of us to get together and work. That's also one of the reasons why I wanted to do the Global Constitution as a research project, but also as an open science justice lab, because I really want a sort of a story where like-minded people come together, even if we disagree on certain issues, but that we agree together that there's something wrong with our economic system.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for that, Zulueta. Do we have one more question for Zulueta before we let her go to bed this evening? Any other questions to follow up? Yep, we've got one more question in the audience for you.
It's a quick one. Hi, Zulueta. This is Myron. It's been a long time. Good to see you. Zulueta was my PhD supervisor back in the day. Just a quick reflection from you, because it looks like nowadays is like the worst politically viable time to do what you're proposing. So how do we get around that? Even the WTO doesn't seem to function anymore.
So, you know, the thing is that in the history of climate negotiations, when the United States wanted to not to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, and when Australia didn't want to, that was a time when the municipalities and provincial governments got active. In the Netherlands right now, we have a very right-wing government that wants to do nothing on environmental issues, and this is the moment for us to get a bottom-up movement and to change things, because we can't expect anything from the government. So in some ways, we should see the process as so. And for me, environmental issues are neither left wing or right wing; they will affect everybody. And so, if you get the wrong government Then you have to work at other levels of government. You need to get that's why we need the collaboration going. And Myron, if you want to get on board with this global constitution idea, I would be grateful to you and your friends and classmates and colleagues, because I really think we have to put our best effort forward to fight this battle at different levels. Because in my job in the 10-member group, it is so complicated because, for example, the United States doesn't pay its membership dues to the UN. China is not paying its membership dues to the UN. So the whole multilateral system, the secretarial multilateral system, is collapsing under the weight of its inability to function within that limited resource, and that affects also our role as advisors, because even if we want to bring scientists to the UN, we can't because there's no money in the system. So what you're seeing is that there are forces at work right now to crumble the multilateral system, and I think we just have to prop it up, and we have to push. We have to tell everybody the US is not paying and China is not paying, and we have to shame them by naming them. We have to really get really active. We can't afford to become indifferent scholars just sitting behind a computer doing our own thing, publishing in top journals and not getting onto the stage. But how lovely, Myron, to see you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Joyita, for your expertise, your time, all of your effort, in this, and for, the invitation for us to all join you in this battle. So I'd like everyone to give you a round of applause. And thank you ever so much. I encourage everyone to join you in your efforts in this research effort. And thank you ever so much. Have a great night. And sleep well. Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right. Good night.
Thank
Bye.
you so much, Joyita.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so next up we have a video from Professor David Boyd from the University of Columbia. And David Boyd, obviously, Naia gave an introduction. He needs no introduction. He couldn't be here today because he was teaching, but he's giving us a message from his perspective on this issue too, which will be very important. If you don't know David Boyd, he was fundamental to getting the resolution, passed in 2022 on the linking of environmental human rights, to human rights as we know it, right? It's this fundamental recognition and resolution that was passed in 2022. It's amazing it took us that long to get there, but he led the charge on that. So we've got a presentation from him that he videoed for us.
Hello from the west coast of Canada in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish First Nations. Friends and colleagues, I don't need to tell you about the unprecedented planetary crisis in which we find ourselves. Scientists from leading organizations, including the IPCC and IPBES, have made it crystal clear that we need systemic and transformative changes in order to address this crisis. And here's where human rights come into the picture. Because over recent centuries, human rights have proven to be a catalyst for precisely that, transformative changes. Think about the way that abolitionists used human rights to bring about the end of slavery, the use of human rights by women to achieve vast progress towards equality, the use of human rights by the civil rights movement, by indigenous people, by LGBTQ plus people, by the movement to end apartheid. None of these cases was easy. None of these cases were 100% successful, but they did bring about transformative changes. And so, in the context of the planetary crisis, it's encouraging to see that human rights are being increasingly used. For example, in Europe, to address the climate crisis, people in the Netherlands and Germany have successfully used their human rights to force governments to take more ambitious climate action. In the famous Urgenda case that went to the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, the court used the science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and combined that science with the human rights obligations on the Dutch government pursuant to its constitution and the European Convention on Human Rights, and concluded that the Netherlands' inadequate climate action was a violation of human rights. And the government has responded by closing down coal-fired power plants, by investing substantially in renewable energy, by lowering speed limits. And the net result is that the Netherlands has made substantial progress towards reducing its emissions, far greater progress than previously planned. In Germany, a group of young people brought a human rights complaint against the government for its allegedly inadequate climate target, which was 55% reductions by 2030. And the court, again, used science and human rights to conclude that the government was placing far too great a burden on generations coming after 2030. And as a result, Germany increased its climate ambition by changing its target to require a 65% reduction by 2030. And even more promising is the emergence of a human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, a right that was recognized for the first time at the global level by the UN General Assembly via a resolution adopted on July 28, 2022. And although this was the first global recognition, the right to a healthy environment has been found at the national and regional levels dating back to the 1970s. Slovenia and Portugal put it in their constitutions in their early 1970s. American states such as Hawaii, Montana, and Pennsylvania put it in their state constitutions. And today, 164 countries around the world recognize the right to a healthy environment in law through their constitutions, legislation, human rights treaties, or court decisions. And so we have decades of experience with the right to a healthy environment. We know that empirically it results in better environmental protection, better records on a range of indicators, and we know what it includes. It includes the right to breathe clean air, to have access to safe and sufficient water and adequate sanitation, healthy and sustainably produced food, non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and a safe, livable climate. And the right to a healthy environment is also accompanied by a toolbox of procedural rights, including access to information, public participation in decision-making, access to justice with effective remedies when people's right is being threatened or violated, as well as associated rights, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, etc. And when these rights are implemented, then we can see the tangible impact on people's lives and the environment around the world. I could actually give you hundreds of examples, so let me just do a quick world tour. In Mpumalanga, South Africa, in Jakarta, Indonesia, courts have ruled that governments must take action to improve air quality in the most polluted parts of these countries. In a number of countries, people have used their right to a healthy environment to protect nature, to protect endangered species and ecosystems. In Ecuador, to protect cloud forests. In Costa Rica, to protect hammerhead sharks, scarlet macaws, and sea turtles. In the Philippines, to protect old-growth forests. In fact, to bring about an end to logging in old-growth forests. To protect endangered wolves in Portugal. And in many countries, the right to a healthy environment has been used to improve living and environmental conditions in what are known as sacrifice zones, areas where profits and private interests have historically been prioritized over human rights, human health, and the environment. So, for example, in Manila, in the Philippines, the Supreme Court ordered a cleanup, and activities taken by 13 government agencies have dramatically reduced levels of fecal coliform bacteria in Manila Bay, largely through the construction of solar-powered wastewater treatment plants. In Buenos Aires, Argentina, again, a Supreme Court decision has catalyzed billions of dollars in investment in water treatment infrastructure, wastewater treatment infrastructure, waste management, environmental health initiatives, and environmental enforcement, resulting in dramatic improvements in the lives of millions of people in that capital city. In La Oroya, Peru, a recent decision of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights holds great promise for people who've lived in the shadow of a metal smelter for many decades. And these examples are just the tip of the iceberg. There have been cases where governments have been held accountable for violating people's right to a healthy environment by not taking adequate climate action. For example, young people in Hawaii used their right to a healthy environment under the state constitution to reach a settlement with the state government, requiring that government to implement the most ambitious decarbonization plan for the transportation sector of anywhere in the world. to decarbonize completely by 2040, to give the young people a voice in determining what actions need to be taken, and to give them access to court if the government's not taking sufficiently bold and aggressive action. So, friends and colleagues, what all of this comes down to is requiring unprecedented collaboration between scientists, lawyers, civil society, indigenous peoples, to generate the information and the knowledge to demonstrate violations or potential violations of the right to a healthy environment, and then holding governments to account. Because governments need to understand that when people have the right to a healthy environment, governments have obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill this right. So I hope that we have the opportunity to work together to advance this fundamental tool for achieving a just and sustainable future. Hope you have a great conference in Oaxaca, and thank you for your time.
So I hope you'd agree with me. We've had, two world-leading experts on this issue now speak to us. So hopefully, you have an idea about the global scope of the problem, which Zulueta really set out really well, and tangible examples from David about how people are actually acting to, flip the switch, and everything. Now what we're going to do, we have Laura in the room with us now. Laura has spent time studying food security, the fundamental right, one of the rights that was recognized in this resolution was the right to food. And so we're going to ask Laura a number of questions about the right to food in Mexico and what that means. And so we have some questions. We're going to go back to back, me and Naia, and we're going to put Laura on the spot. And hopefully this will help you understand, as we're going to go into a discussion after, how to navigate this issue in your discussions too. So we're bringing it down to earth here with Laura in the room. So if you want to kick us off with our first question, I'll give you the mic as well.
Laura, muchas gracias por venir.
Gracias.
So,
can I just say a few things before? Muchas gracias al pueblo de Oaxaca por su hospitalidad. I want to thank Oaxaca people for their hospitality today. Thank you so much. You cannot. That's better. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. And just a small clarification there. The right to food, which is the right that I have been focusing lately, was recognized first in 1948 in the Human Rights Declaration, and then in 1966 in the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But definitely the right to healthy environment, which was universally recognized in 2021 and then 2022, was very important for the topics that we are discussing here. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here with you today. And yes, please, Naia, ask the question that I already prepared. So do not worry.
It's okay that you prepared. Yes. So actually, Zia and I tried to solve or tried to approach the problem that both Zulueta Gupta and David Boyd posed in their presentations. So there are some questions that are critical to this. We thought of them, and we will ask some of them to Laura, and be attentive because then it's your time to participate. We will make some groups of 3 to 5 people actually, and try to approach the problem. Okay? So Laura, the expert on the road, do you have any key opening remarks on the issue of the human right to a healthy environment? It can be the right to food. What is it, and why should the people in this room care?
Okay. So, with respect to the right to a healthy environment, we already heard David. So, I would like to focus on a more general context, and I'm talking about the economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights, where the right to healthy environment is part of these rights, and also the right to food that I mentioned earlier. Also, right to health, education, safe and sufficient water, adequate standards of living, etc. They are all part of these so-called social rights. And I would like to emphasize 2 things about these rights. So, first of all, between these rights, they do not compete with each other. They are indivisible and interdependent in nature, which means If one of them suffers, the other will suffer as well. If one of them gets elevated, the others will benefit from it. So that's number one. And then those social rights, along with civil and political rights, they, in general, they conform what we know as a human rights approach. So what we are reading or listening, what is to have a human rights-based approach is this. It's all human rights working together. So why would you care? Why would we care about this? Well, we care about this. We need to care about this because human rights are an amazing tool, not just for the reasons David and Judita told us, but because they give us clarity. For me, human rights are like a map. So in two regards. The first clarity that they give us is they divide the world into duty bearers and right holders. If you are an authority, then you are obliged to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. If you are a corporation, then you have responsibility to protect and, above all, respect human rights. If you are an individual, like you and I, then we are right holders. And alone or in community, we have these enforceable rights. Yet, even though we are all universally have these human rights, marginalized populations always come first. So that this is a very clear message. The second part of these roles and tools with respect to the clarity that the human rights-based approach give us is the fact that we have tools. David mentioned them: access to information, access to justice with effective remedy, and public participations. So these are tools that allow individuals to become more empowered and allow individuals to make accountable governments and businesses. So that's one part of the equation. So the other part is the clarity with respect to challenges themselves. So what the human rights give us, for example, the right to food, it shed light to every link of the chain. If one part of the, for example, if we are studying food systems, then the right to food would allow us to realize that if we are looking into food availability, for example, so we need to look not only into production, but all the cycle, including food loss and waste. But also, if we are only researching food availability, there is the other part, which is food access. And we need to take into account individuals that are at the other line. So are those individuals have the means to feed themselves? So they would need means either to produce food or to purchase food. They would need income. So also, are those individuals are not able to feed themselves, maybe it's a child, then or vulnerable populations, they will need access to public food procurement programs. So is this human rights-based approach what gives us is the clarity about this, but also it gives us clarity where not to go. A few years ago, the Harvard School of Law, with all its resources and prestige, came up with this map, an interactive tool to disclose where are the laws and the policies around the world that support food charity. And I'm talking about food banks founded by Walmart Surplus Food. So I think we could do better than give surplus food, wasted food to our vulnerable communities. So this rights-based approach helps us to realize that. There's no right to charity, by the way. There's only right to adequate food. And that's it for the first question.
That's brilliant. So I'm going to intertwine two questions for you, Lau. I'm a data scientist. I'm not a lawyer. You know, you're a lawyer. You know,
Yes.
And so I got a question for you, which is, can you give me a tangible example how data generated by someone like me, like a data scientist, has been critical for, you know, an environmental legal case, maybe specifically with regards to the right to food? By extension of that, what are the major pain points for lawyers like you? Like, what should scientists like me or data scientists be doing for lawyers like you, so that these rights can be realized more quickly, more effectively?
Thank you, Sia. Yes. So David already mentioned some amazing cases where data is used to advance right to healthy environment. I think one of the most prominent cases for the right to food is the case of let me read this properly. People's Unions for Civil Liberties versus India. This is a case that was decided by the Supreme Court of India in 2001, and it has amazing repercussions, and they use data on undernourished people and hungry people in India. So first of all, previous to this decision, the right to food was not elevated to constitutional rank. It was just a guiding principle. So what the Supreme Court of India did with this case was elevated. And this is very special because normally it is the legislature that includes the right to food in human rights into constitutions through an amendment of the constitution or through a new constitution. So this is very special. Then also this case create new and improve food security programs that would subsidize food for vulnerable populations, and also that will get school to kids that are in the school. And this school-feeded program is the largest in the world and one of the most effective ones. And we have data now that says that this particular program improved food security in India, not only for the kids that attended at that point, but intergenerational. So this is very powerful repercussion. And also there are other laws and policies that are put into place after this very important case. So I think this is one of my favorite ones to show. In Bolivia, we can see a very interesting conversation happening between scientists and policymakers or decision makers. So there is a law that is supporting agriculture, sustainable agriculture in Bolivia. But the law is asking the government to create a census regarding the agriculture and disaggregate it by gender. So scientists in Bolivia respond to this, and in 2015 they created the first census of agro census with disaggregated data, which shed light that women were very important to agriculture and they were very importantly underpaid. And then the government plays at least 3 different policies to improve the situation and to support women. So that's another example.
I'm going to ask one last question. We're running out of time.
Sure.
So David Boyd talks about the human rights to a healthy environment, right? These are the 6 dimensions or substantive elements that are captured within those human rights to a healthy environment. We have the right to breathe clean air, to live in a safe climate, etc. Laura comes from a background of right to food, so I'm not going to let you choose healthy and sustainable food. But if I were to ask you, you have to choose one substantive element, one dimension that you think lacks of research, that you think we have to put our efforts on. What dimension would you choose?
That's a bit of it's a bit difficult for me because of course I will choose that. But maybe I could respond to that by saying we can argue that we have enough data to act upon. We can argue that scientists are doing quite well. And there is more of a political will to change things. So we can argue that. But I know this question is part of a question that you will ask them. So let me just tell you that in the academics we have been discussing these things specifically in the last 2 decades or so, the importance of the recognition of rights into constitutions, into human rights treaties, etc. And at this point, we are already surpassing that a bit because we're realizing the main challenge here is implementation. So the right is in the constitution, then the laws are responding, the policies also are there, and the courts are saying that these individuals have the right of, for example, food or to a healthy environment. But there are court decisions that are not obeyed. There are laws that are not followed. So we need to make the governments accountable. We need to, for example, follow the money. If the constitution of a certain state says everyone has a right to food, and then the law and the policy is saying, for example, we, the government, we will allocate $10 billion, 10 billion pesos to create school cafeterias. We need to see, and we need the help of scientists to follow that money and to see if that is the case or not. What about subsidies? What about, all these things? So yeah, maybe just I will leave you with that, and whatever you're thinking, think about how to implement it, not only how to address it.
Thank you, Laura.
That's brilliant. If we can give Laura a round of applause. Thanks so much, Laura. So what we're going to do is, I love the cross-cutting theme there. It's like, don't pick one, just follow the money and it will get you to everything. That was like, great. But what we'd like you to do is form groups. Maybe there's like a group here, there's maybe 2 groups over here, maybe there's 2 groups over here. We'd like you to pick a dimension in your group that you'd like to speak to. We'd like you to scan. You could scan this if there's someone that has a computer and can take notes. This is to take notes. So someone in your group ideally would take notes. And in that document, you're going to list your dimension, one of those dimensions in your group. You're going to list the people in your group, and you're going to answer a number of questions. And you're going to discuss these questions. So you need to assign someone in your group to take notes. And so, for example, you might pick a safe climate. And the first question we're going to ask, we're going to start in your groups, is what do you think this should encompass? Because this is relatively new, right? Like if you looked at Joyita's presentation, she had some specific thresholds based on temperature, but maybe it's more expansive than that. Maybe it's the propensity for flooding, the knock-on effects of that on, on health, diarrhea, and contagious diseases, right? And so all of the things that encompass in a safe climate, what would that mean to you? And some of them are easier, I would say, than others. So biodiversity, what does the right to, healthy ecosystems mean to you? So pick one of these dimensions. And I know we have Ralph in the room that, is a biodiversity expert. So he'll tell you how challenging this is, right? And so we all have our views and experiences and our expertise. So encourage you to go in clusters. You can either if you go back one one back. Yeah, this one. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, cool. It's just a bit of a delay. So either scan this or go to the bit.ly and start filling out. We're going to ask you to feedback as well. So we'll come back to you and ask you to share with the rest of the group. So we're going to take like a 10-15 minute breakout, and then we're going to all share again, and then we're going to go through the questions.
The most important thing is questions to Laura? Of
course.
Oh
yeah, sorry, Lau.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You can ask Lau questions. Yeah. Yeah. We are a little bit pressed for time. Maybe we'll take one question. Yeah.
No, just wanted to follow up on your last comment about implementation. And can you hear me? I was just wondering, because now the UDR, which is such a big thing, and probably other people are working with that as well, finally has included a human rights dimension in the deforestation-free agreements. And this is great news for most of us who have been working with social impacts. And then the second question we get oftentimes is, okay, where is the databases? Where are the databases? And then it's also for you, how can we map out possible ways to implement a law like that, which will require, environmental rights from all the producing countries. And there is this idea that this data on social impacts in general, human rights more specifically, is unreliable, subjective, not, regularly updated. So just your views on that.
It is true. It is unreliable and it is not up to date. It's very difficult. We have seen that cases resolved in the Supreme Courts of the countries are in comparison with law and policy, are the ones that get us faster there. But while it is fairly easy for a lawyer, I'm from Mexico, to follow a case in the Supreme Court, and it's fairly big because it's not very easy. I spent a couple of months just to trace the right to food of Mexico. So that it's almost an impossible task if you want to go and look for the rest of the world. And it's very important because litigants from around the world came with very interesting arguments of how to present the case and how to get the case adjudicated. And we are losing all these expertise because we don't know. So we really need to map that. I am fairly jealous. There is an initiative that is with David Boyd and a scholar from New York University. His name is Cesar Rodriguez Garavito, and they have been mapping climate change litigation around the world. So I would love to see that for the right to food, but as I argued in the beginning, for all of social rights. So that's something that if any one of you is interested, please come and talk to me because we really need to map this. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I can continue after. I can talk about from a data science perspective. I've got lots of stories. We need data, but in many places, when we talk about like climate adaptation and funding for loss and damage, the money that's flowing is going towards programs that don't even match up to the risks. And so even like a basic data, that kind of gets us 80% of the way would be brilliant to get the NDCs and the NEPs, these adaptation and commitments actually in line with the threats that are being faced by these populations. And so, we talk about this, I talk about this with a lot of my CGIR colleagues, it's, like a bit more data would be good. Even, or like a bit of, you can make a decision making on the data that we have too. And so, so what we do now is you can pull these chairs around. What I'd suggest is pull chairs around into like little circles, and we'll come around and sit in your groups and follow through these ideas with you.
And one thing that Zia didn't mention, this is something to have fun. So it's not an exam. We're just here to learn from each other. Let's just put ideas there. It's brainstorming, fun exercise. Learn from other people. Enjoy it.